my parents ignored my calls for a week. When I finally went to their house, IT was in shambles. I reached for my phone to call the police, then heard a noise from the closet. My blood ran cold. Inside was, can you imagine a world where the people who are supposed to love you the most completely abandon you? And then, you have to pick up the shattered pieces after your own brother destroys everything, leaving behind a terrified child and an unspeakable horror. Hey everyone, my name is Jackson Palmer, and I'm 31. Right now, I manage a busy little hotel here in Las Vegas, the city of lights and fleeting dreams. On the surface, yeah, my life looks pretty stable. Good job, decent apartment, a schedule packed enough to keep me from, well, overthinking things. But if you were to ask me about my family, about my memories of growing up back in Reno, you'd hear a completely different story. One filled with cracks, lingering pain, and a kind of love that, honestly, I still struggle to express. I was born and raised in Reno, a small town tucked away in the Nevada mountains. It's the kind of place where everybody knows your name, and life just moves at its own slow, almost unchanging rhythm. My father, Joseph, and my mother, Marilyn, they were classic small-town folk, hardworking, simple, and always there. From a young age, I was practically part of the furniture at their grocery store, always behind the counter, bagging groceries, or restocking cans of soup. It was a modest, weathered little place, with a faded wooden sign, and this incredible smell of fresh bread always mixing with the musty scent of the old wooden floor. I loved that place. Not because it was fancy or special, but because, back then, it was my entire world. Our family home was just a few blocks from the store, a 2-story house with a perpetually weedy front yard and this giant old oak tree I'd climb every single summer. That's where I grew up, where I learned to tie my shoes, where I heard my mom's lullabies, and where I saw both my parents' smiles and their tears. But if you're picturing some perfectly happy, idyllic family, you'd be wrong. Dead wrong. Despite those warm moments, our family was always overshadowed by a looming presence. A shadow named Dylan. My younger brother. Dylan was 5 years younger than me, and from the moment he was little, he was the absolute center of our universe. Mom called him her golden boy, all curly hair and sparkling eyes. Dylan had this smile, you know? The kind that could just melt anyone. And my parents, especially my mom, they just couldn't resist him. They spoiled him rotten. New toys, fancy clothes, instant forgiveness for every single mistake. Meanwhile, I was the older son. Expected to be mature. Responsible. Dylan? He got to live carefree, like his missteps were just harmless little pranks. I don't blame my parents. I truly believe they loved both of us. Just differently. I remember evenings at the store, me staying behind to clean up while Mom whisked Dylan off for ice cream. Or the times I'd get yelled at for breaking a glass, while Dylan could send an entire tray of pastries crashing to the floor and just get a gentle pat on the head. Those small things. They piled up over the years. Dylan and I, we grew up like parallel lines. Living under the same roof, but never, ever truly connecting. When I turned 18, I finally left Reno for college in Las Vegas. And man, for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. Like I could actually live for myself. I studied business, landed a solid job at a hotel, and slowly, piece by piece, I built a new life. But every time I went back to Reno, this heaviness, it just hung in the air. Dylan, now a teenager, he was changing. That angelic smile from his childhood? It was gone. Replaced by something tinged with defiance. With recklessness. He started skipping school, running with a bad crowd. And then, like a storm I saw coming from a mile away, he fell into gambling. Gambling in Nevada? It's practically the state sport. It's everywhere, from slot machines in supermarkets to the glitzy casinos of Vegas. But for Dylan, it wasn't just a pastime. It was a disease. An addiction that ate him alive. I'll never forget the first time my mom called me, her voice just trembling. Dylan had stolen money from the store's safe to gamble. I drove back that very night. Found my dad sitting silently in his chair, completely defeated. My mom was sobbing in the kitchen. And Dylan? He just shrugged. I'll pay it back, he said, no big deal. But I knew he wouldn't. He never did. The debts kept piling up and Dylan just sank deeper. He even married a woman named Sutton. I genuinely thought she might be the one to pull him out of that abyss. But their marriage? It lasted less than 2 years. Sutton left, taking what little hope there was. She left Dylan, and she left their young son, Jaden, who was only 3. And instead of stepping up to care for his own kid, Dylan just abandoned him. Left Jaden with my parents while he drifted, like a ghost in the wind. Showing up occasionally to beg for money, cause chaos, and then disappear again. Jaden, now 6 years old, he is the one thing that still brings a sliver of light to our family. Every time I went back to Reno, I'd make sure to spend time with him. Telling him stories, or just sitting on the porch, watching cars pass by. Jaden has eyes just like Dylan's when he was a kid, but so much more innocent. So pure. He calls me Uncle Jack, and he'd hug me so tight whenever I had to leave. But even Jaden couldn't erase the growing distance between me and my parents. Our relationship had been fractured for a long, long time. It's not that I didn't love them. I did deeply. But their endless favoritism towards Dylan, and the constant burdens they'd placed on me every single time he messed up, it just wore me down. Every time my mom called, I braced myself for another rant about Dylan, his debts, his troublemaking. And each time, I just felt drained and helpless. Last month, Mom started calling more frequently than usual. Her voice was frail, practically shaking with worry. Dylan came by again, she'd say. He demanded money. And he brought some strangers with him. She sounded so lost. I don't know what to do, Jackson. I told her, Mom, call the police if he's causing trouble. But she just sighed, this deep, weary sigh. He's my son. I can't do that. I hung up, my heart heavy. I knew she wouldn't do anything. She never did. I thought about going back to Reno, confronting Dylan, even bringing Jaden to live with me in Vegas. But work just swept me away. And I told myself, everything will be fine. My parents can handle it. I was wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. Then, a few days ago, this creeping sense of unease started to settle in my heart, like a cold wind cutting through the blazing Las Vegas summer. It started with unanswered calls. I called Mom, then Dad. All I got was that endless ringing, echoing in an empty void. I sent text after text, simple questions. Mom, are you okay? Dad, what are you up to? How's Jaden doing? But my phone screen stayed stubbornly silent. Not a single reply. At first, I tried to reassure myself. Maybe they're busy. Maybe at the store. Maybe their phones just died. But as the third day passed, then the fifth, that unease wasn't just a fleeting breeze anymore. It had turned into a full-blown storm, raging in my chest. I tried not to overthink. God, I really tried. But every night, as the neon lights of Las Vegas flickered outside my window, I'd find myself clutching my phone, scrolling through those unanswered messages, my heart heavy with dread. I thought of my dad, his tall, lean frame, his eyes always tired but so full of steadfast patience. I thought of my mom, her gentle smile, but a voice that grew weaker, more fragile, every single time she mentioned Dylan. And then Jaden. My 6-year-old nephew, with those big, round, innocent eyes, probably sitting in that Reno house, clutching his worn-out teddy bear. What the hell was going on? Were my parents okay? My mom's last calls about Dylan, his incessant disruptions, showing up with strangers in tow, had left this gnawing sense of dread inside me. Dylan wasn't just asking for money anymore. He'd changed. Become more aggressive. More reckless. Mom said he'd show up at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, banging on the door, screaming for money to pay off debts. Once, she even said he threatened to make a big deal if they didn't comply. A big deal. I wanted to race back to Reno right then, grab Dylan by the collar and just scream at him. Scream that he had no right to torment our parents like that. But I held myself back. Told myself, Jackson, you can't keep cleaning up your brother's messes forever. I was wrong. My biggest mistake. The colossal mistake was thinking I could stay on the sidelines. That I could let my parents face the storm named Dylan, all alone. By the 7th day, still no word. Still no response from my parents. Then, a call came from an unfamiliar number. My heart pounded. It was Mrs. Helen, the neighbor across from the grocery store. Her voice was frantic, laced with pure worry. Jackson, she said, I need to tell you something. Your parents' store. It's been closed all week. No one's seen them. I've tried calling, but no one picks up. Something's not right, Jackson. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. The grocery store. That place my parents had poured their entire lives into. It had never been closed for more than 2 days, not even during holidays. For it to be shuttered for a whole week? It was utterly unimaginable. I hung up, my hands trembling. I tried to piece my thoughts together. Maybe they were sick. Maybe on a spontaneous trip? But deep down, I knew. Those were just flimsy excuses I was feeding myself. Dylan. Had he done something? Had he pushed my parents into a situation they couldn't escape? I couldn't sit still another second. That evening, I called my boss, my voice choking, and requested emergency leave. I need to go home, I managed. It's urgent. He didn't ask for details, just told me to be careful. I threw some clothes into a small suitcase. Before leaving my apartment, I looked out the window. The Las Vegas lights still twinkled, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. 7 hours. That's how long the drive from Vegas to Reno was. And I knew this trip wasn't just about finding my parents. It was about facing everything I'd been avoiding for years. As I got into the car, started the engine, and began the long drive, memories of my childhood flooded back. Vivid, like they'd happened yesterday. I remembered afternoons behind the store counter, Dad teaching me how to count change. Mom slipping a peppermint candy into my hand. The smell of those old wooden floors, the jingle of the bell when customers walked in. Dylan and I, just kids, playing tag between the aisles, laughing until Mom pretended to scold us. But those memories, no matter how warm, couldn't ease the dread suffocating my chest. Every time the car passed through a dark stretch of road, I saw him. Dylan. Not the Dylan from back then, but the Dylan of now. With cold eyes, a harsh voice, and the threats Mom had described. What had happened in that house? Were my parents truly okay? Or was something far, far worse waiting for me in Reno? With every mile, my fear grew, a stone pressing heavier and heavier on my heart. I turned on the radio, desperate for a song to drown out the silence, but no melody could overpower the whisper in my head. Jackson. You've abandoned them for too long. I pressed the gas pedal, the car speeding toward Reno. Toward the house that held both my childhood and my deepest wounds. That 7-hour drive felt like an eternity. When the town's welcome sign finally came into view, my chest tightened. It felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. The town looked the same, familiar streets, houses peeking out under the moonlight. But something felt off. Like the air itself carried a warning. I drove straight to my parents' grocery store, a place I always pictured lit up, filled with life and laughter. But when I pulled up, I could barely believe my eyes. The store was completely shuttered. The old wooden sign, Palmer's Grocery, still hung there, faded and tilted, like it was weary from witnessing something terrible. Through the window, only darkness. No light. No sign of life. The shelves I used to neatly stock were swallowed by shadows. My heart raced. I had to take deep, shaky breaths just to keep from panicking. My parents would never close the store for this long. Never, unless. I didn't dare finish that thought. I started the car again, driving toward their house a few blocks away. The familiar road that once led me through carefree summer days now felt endless. Every street corner, every old oak tree, they stirred memories. Dylan and me running around. Mom calling us in for dinner from the porch. Dad reading the newspaper in his armchair. But now, those memories only deepened my unease. I didn't want to know what I was about to face. But a bad feeling clung to me like a shadow. I couldn't shake it. When I pulled up to that familiar 2-story house, my heart just stopped. The place was pitch black. Not a single light in the windows. Not a sound. The front door was slightly ajar, like someone had left in an unimaginable hurry. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as lead, each step feeling like it was dragging me toward an abyss. Dad? Mom? Jaden. I called out, but only the wind answered. Cold. Lifeless. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, and the sight before me hit me like a physical punch to the chest. This house, once filled with laughter, the smell of Mom's cookies, Jaden's babbling stories, it was a wreck. Total chaos. Furniture in the living room was toppled, like a storm had swept through. Kitchen cabinet doors hung open, dishes scattered across the floor, some shattered into sharp fragments. A long, angry crack ran across the wall, like something had been slammed against it. Even the wooden chair Dad had proudly built himself lay broken, a leg missing. Everything screamed chaos. Like the house had witnessed a battle. I stood there in the living room, feeling the blood in my veins turn to ice. Dad. Mom. I called again, my voice thin. And reedy, barely my own. But that thick silence enveloped me like a heavy blanket, pressing down on my chest. I stepped forward, tripping over a spoon on the floor. Each step felt like a knife twisting in my heart, because I knew no one would leave the house like this by accident. Not Dad, who kept everything so meticulously in order. Not Mom, who polished the floors until they gleamed. And certainly not Jaden, my careful little nephew who cherished everything around him. I tried to gather my thoughts, to find a rational explanation. Maybe they'd been robbed. Maybe they'd fled in a panic. Or maybe something had happened to them. Something I didn't dare imagine. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. I needed to find my parents. To find Jaden. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police. But at that exact moment, a faint sound came from the end of the hallway. From my parents' bedroom. A shaky, labored breath, mixed with soft, stifled sobs. Like a small, wounded animal trying to hide. My heart pounded. Blood rushed to my ears. I froze, listening, trying to determine if I'd imagined it. But then it came again. Clearer. More desperate. I moved toward the bedroom, my legs trembling. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. As I pushed it open, a musty smell and that same cold silence hit me. My parents' bed was untouched, but the blankets were disheveled, as if someone had lain there and left in a hurry. Jaden. I called out, my voice breaking. Jaden, is that you? Where are you? There was no reply. Only the labored breathing, now much clearer, coming from the corner of the room. It led me to the old wardrobe, its door slightly open. My hand shook as I reached for the handle, sweat beading on my forehead. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But fear clung to me relentlessly. "It's going to be okay, Jackson," I whispered, as if to reassure some desperate part of myself. "Just open the door." But deep down, I knew nothing was okay. The wardrobe door creaked sharply as I pulled it open, the sound slicing through the terrifying silence of the room. The darkness inside seemed to swallow the faint light from the hallway. But then, amidst the jumble of clothes and the musty smell of old wood, I saw a small figure, curled up in the corner. My eyes strained to adjust. And when the light finally fell on him, I froze. It was Jaden, my 6-year-old nephew. Those clear eyes I always cherished, they were no longer the Jaden I knew. He sat huddled, clutching his tattered teddy bear, the one my mother had given him when he was a baby. His clothes were crumpled, filthy, like he'd been wearing them for a week. His hair was matted, sticking to his forehead, and his face was gaunt and pale, as if hunger had drained every last bit of life from him. But what truly shattered my heart were his eyes. Red-rimmed, wide open, gleaming with a primal fear I'd never, ever seen in a child. He wasn't crying loudly, just soft, choked sobs, as if he'd cried so much he had no strength left. "Jaden," I called, my voice breaking, barely recognizable even to myself. I knelt down, reaching out to touch him, but he flinched, shrinking deeper into the corner as if I were a threat. He clutched that teddy bear so tightly, I feared it might tear. "Jaden, it's Uncle Jack." "You're safe now," I said, my voice trembling, trying desperately to stay calm, even though my heart was screaming. But Jaden didn't respond. He just stared at me, his panicked eyes searching for something. Something to trust. Something to hold on to. Slowly, I reached out again, gently touching his shoulder this time. He didn't pull away, but his small body shook violently, like a dry leaf caught in a cold wind. "What happened, buddy? Where are Grandma and Grandpa?" I asked, my voice catching, fighting back tears. I needed to know. I needed to understand why the house was in ruins, why my parents weren't here, and why Jaden was hiding in a wardrobe like a wounded animal. But Jaden said nothing. He just stared, his red eyes wide. And then, as if his last bit of strength had given out, he collapsed into my arms. His small body felt weightless, so frail. I was afraid a tight hug might break him. I held him close, feeling his rapid, shallow breaths against my shoulder. And in that moment, a pain deeper than anything I'd ever known washed over me. This boy, my beloved nephew, he had endured something horrific. And I, the one who should have protected him, hadn't been there when he needed me most. I lifted Jaden, his small body limp in my arms. "It's okay," I whispered, "I'm here now." I wasn't even sure if I was comforting him or desperately trying to reassure myself. I scanned the room again, frantically, hoping for any sign of my parents. A note. A clue. Anything. But there was only that suffocating silence and the overwhelming chaos. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like an abandoned battlefield. I couldn't stay here. Not another second. Jaden needed help, and I had to get him out of this nightmare. I carried him to the car, laid him gently on the back seat, and wrapped him in a thin blanket I'd found on the couch. His eyes were closed, his chest rising and falling faintly, as if he were clinging to life by a thread. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the car, and sped toward the nearest hospital, my heart absolutely pounding, like it might burst. The 10-minute drive felt like a century. I kept glancing at Jaden in the rearview mirror, terrified he might slip away completely. "Hang on, buddy," I muttered, my voice breaking. "I won't let anything happen to you." But in my mind, questions swirled like sharp, poisoned blades. Where were my parents? What the hell had happened in that house? When I pulled up to the emergency room, I practically shouted for the nurses. "Help! My nephew. He's not okay." A team of doctors and nurses rushed over, wheeling a stretcher to the car. They gently lifted Jaden onto it, and I just stood there, completely helpless, watching as they whisked him inside. A nurse, her eyes full of concern, but still professional, asked me about Jaden's condition. But I could only shake my head, unable to form a clear answer. I don't know," I stammered. "I just found him in a wardrobe. He hasn't said anything. Please save him." Inside the emergency room, the doctors worked fast. They hooked Jaden up to IN4, checked his heart rate, measured his blood pressure, while I stood in the hallway, watching through the small window in the door. Jaden lay there, so small and fragile, like a little bird with broken wings. A doctor emerged, his face grave. "The boy is severely dehydrated and malnourished," he said, likely from days without food or water. "He's also experiencing significant psychological trauma. We'll keep him here for observation. But can you tell us anything about what happened?" I just shook my head, completely overwhelmed by helplessness. I don't know," I whispered. "I just got home and found him like that." But deep down I knew. I couldn't stop here. Jaden had survived, thank God. But what about my parents? That wrecked house. The undeniable signs of violence. The eerie, terrifying silence. I clenched my fists. Anger and pain surged through me like a consuming fire. I had to go back to that house. I stood there in the hospital hallway, peering through that small window into the emergency room where Jaden lay. He looked heartbreakingly small, for tubes in his arm, his face still bearing those terrifying traces of fear. The doctor had said he'd be okay. But okay in this context felt like such an empty, useless word. I turned away, unable to bear the sight for another second. I had to act. I had to find my parents. I called a friend from the hotel, asking him to cover my shifts for a few days. I don't know how long this will take, I said, my voice hollow raw. He didn't ask questions. Just told me to take care of myself and promise to handle everything. I hung up, feeling like I was severing a piece of my normal Las Vegas life, stepping into a nightmare with no end in sight. Back in the car, I drove to my parents' house. The Reno night was cold, the faint moonlight casting an eerie glow on the familiar streets, making them feel utterly alien. When I pulled up to the house, a bone-deep chill ran down my spine. I stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. The house was exactly as I'd left it. Furniture toppled. Dishes shattered. That angry crack on the wall, a grim, terrifying reminder of what had happened. I stood in the living room, breathing in the heavy, stagnant air, desperately searching for any clue, any sign, to understand what had happened to my parents. I walked through each room, checking every corner, but meticulously avoiding touching anything. I knew that if something serious had occurred, the police would need the scene untouched. In the kitchen, I spotted a family photo frame on the floor. I looked down at the cracked glass, my heart clenching at the sight of my parents' smiles, mine, and even Dylan's from when we were kids. The photo was from a summer day when we were still a family, before everything fell apart. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, and dialed 911. I need to report a missing persons case, I managed when the dispatcher's voice came through. My parents, they're not at home. And my nephew. I found him in critical condition. The house, it's been ransacked. Please come. Quickly. My voice choked, each word feeling like it was being wrenched from deep inside my chest. The dispatcher asked basic questions, address, my parents' names, the state of the scene, and I answered mechanically, my mind a painful blank. They told me to wait, that officers would be there soon. I sat on the old sofa, trying so hard to stay calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I scanned the room, desperate for any clue. Dad's jacket still hung on the coat rack, but its pockets were empty. In the kitchen, a cold cup of coffee sat on the table, as if Dad had left mid-sip. Everything in that house seemed to tell a story, but I couldn't for the life of me decipher what it was trying to say. About 15 minutes later, the red and blue lights of a patrol car flashed outside, painting the quiet street with an ominous glow. I heard the car stop, hurried footsteps, and then the door swung open. 3 officers stepped inside, followed by a man in plain clothes, a detective, I assumed. Are you the one who called? Jackson Palmer, the man asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, standing up, trying desperately to keep my voice from trembling. I'm Detective Matthew. Tell us what you know. I led them inside, showing them the wreckage. The broken chairs. Shattered dishes. That angry crack on the wall. I told them about not being able to reach my parents for a week, about Mrs. Helen's frantic call, and about finding Jaden, hidden away in that wardrobe. Each word felt like a fresh stab, but I forced myself to keep going. Matthew took careful notes, his eyes sharp, but thankfully, non-judgmental. We'll look into everything, he said, but first, we need to secure the scene. The officers began cordoning off the house with yellow tape. I stood on the porch, watching as neighbors started to gather, their eyes a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine concern. Whispers floated through the crowd, and I caught fragments. I heard arguing last week, an elderly woman, Mrs. Carter, told an officer. Loud shouting from inside the house. Another man, Mr. Thompson, chimed in. I saw Dylan around here a few times. He was with some rough-looking guys once. Standing outside the store, like they were watching something. Each word hit me like a hammer to the chest. I was both furious and desperate. Dylan. His name kept coming up, like a chilling refrain in a tragic song. I wanted to scream, to demand answers from every single neighbor about what they'd seen or heard. But I knew I had to stay calm. The police needed me clear-headed. And Jaden. Jaden needed me strong. Still, deep inside, a fear was growing like a snarling beast. If Dylan was involved, if he had done something to my parents, I didn't know how I'd ever face that truth. Matthew called me over, asking more questions about Dylan. Where he usually went. His habits. Anything that could help. I told him everything I knew, though each word felt like rubbing salt in an open wound. He's addicted to gambling, I said. He shows up to ask for money. Mom, she always forgave him, no matter how much he hurt her. Matthew nodded, his eyes fixed on his notebook. We'll start looking into this angle, he said. But you should prepare yourself. This might not be a simple missing persons case. His words sent a shiver straight through me. I wanted to believe my parents were okay. That they'd just gone somewhere. That this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew the truth was waiting, and it wouldn't be easy. I turned away, heading back to the hospital where Jaden was. I needed to be with him. I hurried into the hospital, heading straight to Jaden's bedside. The doctors had given him 4 fluids for hours, and he looked slightly better. His skin wasn't that deathly pale color anymore, but his eyes still carried a haunting shadow I knew I'd never forget. I stood by the bed, watching him, my heart feeling like it was being crushed. "It's Uncle Jack," I whispered gently, touching his hand. "You're okay now." Jaden opened his eyes. Those big, round, red-rimmed eyes locked onto mine. Then, as if a dam of fear had finally broken, he burst into wrenching sobs. His cries were raw, desperate, like he'd been holding them in for far too long. He reached out with his small hands, clinging to me, his fingers gripping my shirt as if afraid I'd just vanish. "Uncle Jax, don't go," he whispered, his voice trembling, so faint, so fragile. I had to fight, really fight, not to break down with him. I pulled him into my arms, feeling his tiny body tremble against me. "I'm right here, Jaden." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice catching. But deep down, I knew I was making a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. A doctor came in to check on Jaden. "He's more stable now," she said, her tone gentle but serious. "But he's suffered severe psychological trauma. We need time to assess him further, and it's best not to pressure him right now." I nodded, but my mind was swirling with a million questions. Jaden knew something. He'd been in that house. He'd seen something. And though I didn't want to push him, I needed the truth. Detective Matthew arrived shortly after, accompanied by a female officer whose eyes were kind but cautious. They asked me a few brief questions about Jaden's condition, then requested to speak with him. "We'll be as gentle as possible," Matthew said. "I know it's not the best time, but anything the boy can tell us might help find your parents." I looked at Jaden, still clinging to me, and felt like I was standing at a dangerous crossroads. I didn't want him to relive whatever nightmare he'd witnessed. But I also knew it was the only way to find my parents. "Jaden," I said, kneeling by the bed, keeping my voice as soft as possible. "Can you help Uncle Jack a little? These people are police officers, and they want to find Grandma and Grandpa. Can you tell us what happened?" Jaden shook his head frantically, his eyes wide with terror. He clutched his teddy bear tightly, as if it were his last shield. "No, I don't want to," he whispered, his voice quivering. I hugged him, letting him rest his head on my shoulder. "I'm right here, Jaden. You don't have to be scared. Just tell us what you remember." "Okay. I won't let anyone hurt you." I could feel his rapid breathing, and in that moment, I wanted nothing more than to take him away from all this pain. But I couldn't. I needed the truth, no matter how brutal. After a few more minutes of my gentle reassurance, Jaden finally began to speak, his voice halting, punctuated by heart-wrenching sobs. Dad came to the house," he whispered, and my heart seemed to just stop. "Dad came with some other people. They were yelling. Grandma and Grandpa yelled back." Jaden paused, his eyes wide, as if he was reliving the entire terrifying moment. I held his small hand, trying to keep my voice steady. "Go on, buddy. What did they do?" Jaden trembled, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Dad, he was really mad. He shouted. Told Grandma and Grandpa to give him money. But they wouldn't." He took a shaky breath. Then there was a loud crash. Things broke. He stopped again, clutching the teddy bear, his tiny body shaking violently. I was scared. I ran to the wardrobe. I hid. His voice faded, sinking into a memory too heavy to bear. I heard Grandma and Grandpa cry out. Then everything went quiet. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. I held Jaden tightly, fighting back my own tears. But inside, a storm was raging. Dylan. He was there. He fought with our parents. And the sounds Jaden heard. I didn't dare think further. Matthew and the female officer took notes quickly, their expressions hardening. "Do you remember anything about the people with your dad?" the officer asked, her voice gentle but careful. Jaden shook his head, tears spilling again. "I don't know. They were tall. They were scary. Covered in tattoos." He broke into wrenching sobs, clinging to me, and I knew he couldn't say any more. I signaled to Matthew and he nodded, standing up. "Thank you, Jaden," he said. "You're a brave boy. We have enough to start the investigation. Dylan will be our primary suspect." The doctor stepped in gently, asking everyone to leave so Jaden could rest. "The boy needs time," she said. "He's been through too much." I nodded, but inside I wanted to scream. Dylan. My own brother. What had he done? What had he dragged our parents into? And Jaden, an innocent child, he had witnessed it all. I sat by Jaden's bed, holding his hand, until he finally drifted off to sleep. His breathing was steady now, but I couldn't rest. Jaden's words were like a sharp, agonizing puzzle piece, confirming my worst fear. Dylan hadn't just caused trouble. He'd done something utterly unforgivable. Detective Matthew called me the next morning, his voice low and resolute. "We've designated Dylan as the primary suspect based on Jaden's statement," he said. "We're issuing a manhunt, checking every place he might show up. Do you have any more information about your brother's habits?" I recounted what I knew: the casinos Dylan frequented, the seedy bars where he drank himself senseless. Each word felt like another stab, but I couldn't stop. The police moved quickly. They went to the rundown motel room Dylan rented on the outskirts of Reno. But when Matthew called with an update, his voice was heavy with frustration. The room was empty, he said. Trash strewn everywhere, clothes scattered like he left in a desperate hurry. "We're collecting fingerprints and any clues we can find." I pictured the room, a chaotic mess, reeking of stale alcohol and cigarettes. A perfect, ugly reflection of the person Dylan had become. He'd fled. He knew what he'd done, and he was trying to escape. Meanwhile, I sat by Jaden's side, watching him sleep, his face still etched with that raw fear. The doctor said he needed time to recover, but every time he startled in his sleep, muttering incoherent, terrified words, it felt like someone was squeezing my heart in a vice. I stroked his hair, whispering, "I'm here, Jaden. Everything's going to be okay." But I wasn't sure if I was comforting him, or just desperately trying to convince myself. The truth was, I didn't know if things would ever be okay again. The police continued to track Dylan's increasingly frantic trail. They visited the casinos and dive bars in Reno where he was a regular. A bartender at the Rusty Nail told Matthew that Dylan had shown up a few days ago, frantic, downing drinks, muttering about needing money fast. He looked like he was being hunted, the bartender said. Bloodshot eyes, constantly looking over his shoulder, like he was scared of someone following him. Then he just left without paying for his drinks. Those details sent a genuine chill through me. Dylan wasn't just running. He was terrified. A key lead came from a creditor named Eddie, a man the police tracked down at a small, greasy casino outside town. Eddie, with a gravelly voice and cold, hard eyes, said Dylan owed him tens of thousands of dollars from losing streaks at the tables. "He begged me for more time," Eddie recounted to Matthew later. Said he was about to come into big money to pay it all off. Mentioned something about family taking care of it, but I didn't buy it. He looked like a desperate dog. Eddie's words hit me like a hammer. Family taking care of it. What the hell did Dylan mean by that? Was he planning to get money from our parents? From the grocery store? Or from something far, far worse? The police issued a citywide manhunt for Dylan, extending it to surrounding areas. They sent alerts to checkpoints, casinos, and every cheap motel where he might be hiding. News of the case began to spread like wildfire through our usually quiet town. Neighbors gathered outside my parents' house, whispering, their eyes a mix of pity and unsettling curiosity. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, even visited Jaden and me at the hospital, bringing a tin of homemade cookies. "I can't believe this, Jackson," she said, her voice trembling. Joseph and Marilyn were good people. And Dylan. I saw him with some shady characters. I was worried, but I never thought it would come to this. Her words only fueled the fire raging in my chest. I wanted to scream that I didn't want to believe it either. That I didn't want to think my brother could do something so horrific to our own parents. But the pieces were falling into place. Jaden's account. The wrecked house. The neighbors' stories. And now Eddie's words. They all pointed to Dylan, like arrows aimed straight at my heart. I sat by Jaden, holding his small, cold fingers in my palm. He was still sleeping, but his sleep was restless. Occasionally, he'd mumble words like, "Dad, don't," or "I'm scared." Each whisper cut into me like a blade. I thought about the years Dylan was coddled, defended by Mom, forgiven by Dad. I thought about the times I tried to pull him out of his messes, only for him to smirk and say, "Worry about yourself, Jax. I know how to live my life." Now, his way of living had led to this. A destroyed home. A traumatized child. And our parents, missing. I looked out the hospital window at the moonlight illuminating Reno's rooftops. Somewhere out there, Dylan was hiding, carrying secrets I both yearned and dreaded to uncover. I hoped the police would find him, drag him out of the shadows to face what he'd done. But at the same time, I feared that moment when I faced Dylan. What would I see? A criminal? A brother? Or a monster who had utterly destroyed our family? Matthew called again late that night, his voice firm but steady. "We're narrowing it down," he said. "We got new leads from the outskirts. We'll find him soon." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Thank you," I said, my voice hollow. I wasn't sure if I was truly ready to face Dylan or not. The next morning, Matthew called me back to the house. "We need you to confirm a few details from some findings the investigation team made," he said over the phone. His voice carried an odd tone, like he was bracing himself for something truly grave. I didn't ask questions. I just drove over, my heart pounding in my chest. When I stepped inside, Matthew was in the living room, joined by another officer taking photos of the scene. The house was still exactly as I remembered it, wrecked, cold, like a wound that refused to heal. "We've done a more thorough search," Matthew said, leading me to the corner where Dad used to work at his desk. "We found this in the drawer." He handed me a faded yellow envelope, its edges worn. I took the envelope, my hands trembling. My name was scrawled across it in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. "Jackson," it read. Just seeing it sent a deep chill down my spine. I opened the envelope, pulling out a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky, as if written in sheer panic or profound fear. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steel myself, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to read. "Jackson, our son," the letter began. "If you're reading this, things have probably gone too far. We're sorry for everything. We were wrong. So very wrong to let Dylan become what he is. We loved him, but we spoiled him too much, letting him grow into a selfish, broken man. We tried to fix it, but it might be too late." I stopped reading, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The words cut like a sharp, unrelenting knife. I knew my parents had always defended Dylan, forgiven his mistakes, but hearing them admit their culpability in their own handwriting, it filled me with both agonizing pain and furious anger. I forced myself to read on, each line slicing deeper. "Dylan has changed, Jackson. He's no longer the boy we knew. Lately, he's been coming to the house often, demanding money, threatening us. He talked about selling the grocery store, saying it was the only way to settle his debts. We refused, but he wouldn't stop. He brought strangers, men with cold, dead eyes. We've been living in fear, Jackson. We're afraid of the day things go too far." Tears welled up, blurring the words. I thought I was prepared for anything. But no, there was no way to brace for this. My parents had lived in terror, threatened by their own son, and they chose to keep it from me. A fresh wave of anger surged, at Dylan, at myself for my distance, and even at my parents for letting it come to this. The letter continued, Dad's handwriting growing heavier, more desperate, as if he knew time was running out. "We didn't want to drag you into this, Jackson. You've done so much for this family. Carried so much. We didn't want you to face Dylan. Didn't want you caught up in this. But if you're reading this, we're probably gone. Take care of Jaden. He's innocent, and please forgive us if you can." I folded the letter, unable to read another word. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. The words felt like a final, tragic testament, as if my parents had known a devastating end was coming. They'd been pushed to the absolute edge by their own son, and they'd chosen to protect me, no matter the cost. I gripped the letter, feeling it burn in my hand. Matthew stood beside me, his eyes softening, but he said nothing, as if knowing I needed time to process the unbearable truth I'd just read. "Dylan," I whispered, my voice breaking. His name now felt like a curse. An indelible, horrifying stain. He'd driven our parents to the brink, and I could no longer stand on the sidelines. I handed the letter to Matthew, my voice trembling. "Keep it. It's evidence." He nodded, carefully placing it in a clear plastic bag. But his eyes told me he understood this wasn't just evidence. It was a piece of my family's shattering tragedy. I returned to the hospital right after, unable to bear another second in that house. Jaden was still sleeping, his face less pale now. The letter's words echoed in my mind, each one a painful reminder of my parents' mistakes, and my own. I'd left them alone too long, thinking distance would shield me from Dylan's chaos. But now I couldn't run anymore. Dylan had destroyed our family, and I had to face him, no matter how brutal the truth might be. 3 days later, my phone buzzed. It was Matthew. His voice was curt, but I could hear the stark tension in it. "We found Dylan," he said. "He's at a cheap motel on the outskirts. We've taken him into custody. Would you like to come to the station?" My heart pounded, a sickening mix of relief and dread surging through me. They'd found him. I left Jaden at the hospital under the nurse's care, promising to return soon. He clutched my hand, his eyes still wide with panic, but I forced a smile, dry and strained. "I'll be back soon, Jaden," I said, ruffling his hair. But as I stepped out of the room, I felt like I was walking headfirst into a Category 5 storm. The Reno police station was a gray, unassuming building in the heart of town, with long, sterile corridors and the stale smell of old coffee. Matthew met me at the entrance, his expression stern but tinged with exhaustion. "He's in the interrogation room," he said, leading me through a narrow hallway. "He's rattled, but still denying everything. We need you here to confirm some details." I nodded, though inside, every fiber of my being wanted to turn and run from this moment. But I couldn't. Not now. The interrogation room was small, sparse, with a metal table. And stiff chairs. Dylan sat there, facing Matthew and another officer. I stood behind the one-way glass, watching him through the cold pane. He looked haggard, a mere shadow of himself. His hair was disheveled, his shirt crumpled, and his bloodshot eyes screamed days without sleep. In his hand was a small bag containing some cash and fake IDs, clear signs he'd planned to flee. But what truly chilled me were his eyes, panicked, yet still defiant, as if he still believed he could escape. Matthew began the interrogation, his voice calm, but sharp as a razor. "Dylan, we know you were at your parents' house last week. We have statements from your son, from neighbors, and from a creditor. What did you do?" Dylan kept his head down, his hands clasped tightly, but his mouth stayed stubbornly shut. "I just went to ask for money," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "We argued, sure, but then I left. I didn't do anything." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they stung. He was lying. I knew it. Matthew knew it. The very air in that room seemed to know it. Matthew didn't flinch. He placed a stack of documents on the table, including my parents' letter and photos of the wrecked house. "You sure about that, Dylan?" he asked, his voice cold as steel. "Jaden said you came with some men. You fought with your parents." And he heard things breaking. Loud crashes. "How do you explain that?" Dylan shifted in his seat, his eyes starting away. "The kid's making it up," he muttered, but his voice trembled, like he knew he was losing ground. Matthew pressed on, his tone growing sharper. "We also have a statement from Eddie, your creditor. He said you promised big money to pay off your debts. Where was that money coming from, Dylan? Your parents' store? Their house?" I stood behind the glass, feeling the ground crumble beneath me. Each of Matthew's words was a puzzle piece, forming a horrifying, undeniable picture. Dylan bowed his head, silent, but I could see his shoulders trembling. He was breaking. And I both wanted to scream at him and run from what I was about to hear. Suddenly, Matthew's phone buzzed. He answered, his calm demeanor instantly replaced by grim seriousness. The room fell silent as he nodded a few times, then hung up. Matthew stood, his voice dropping, each word heavy, like a hammer strike. "Dylan," he said. "I just got a call. The crime scene team found the bodies of Joseph and Marilyn Palmer in a vacant lot not far from their house. Both were brutally attacked. Evidence at the scene matches what we found in the house and Jaden's statement. Do you have anything left to deny?" I felt the world stop. Bodies. My parents. I gripped the chair's edge, my head spinning, the room tilting. Their letter, with its trembling, desperate words, now became an unbearable, undeniable truth. I wanted to scream, to shatter the glass and grab Dylan, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, tears streaming down my face without me even noticing. Dylan looked up, his face pale as death. "No, it wasn't," he stammered, but his voice faltered, as if he didn't believe his own pathetic lie. Matthew didn't give him a chance. He slid photos of the crime scene across the table, images I knew I couldn't bear to see, but I knew they were horrifyingly real. "Anything else to say, Dylan?" Matthew asked, his voice now a razor's edge. Dylan broke down. His sobs echoed in the small room. He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking violently. And then, as if his last shred of strength had drained away, he confessed. I didn't mean to," he choked out, his voice broken. "I just wanted money. I needed it to pay my debts. But they wouldn't give it to me. They yelled. Called me a disgrace. I lost control. I hit them. I didn't know what I was doing until they were lying there, not moving. My heart tore apart. Dylan. My brother. Once Mom's golden boy. He had beaten our parents to death." He continued, his voice trembling as if trying to justify his monstrous crime. I panicked. I called some guys from the casino. We buried them in the lot. I thought if no one knew, I could sell the store, the house, pay off my debts, and start over. The room was stunned. Matthew kept his face stoic, but I saw his hand tighten around his pen. The officer beside him shook her head, unable to believe it. And I just stood there, staring at Dylan through the glass. He was no longer my brother. He was the monster who killed our parents, left Jaden in terror, and destroyed everything our family had. I turned away, unable to look any longer. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them. Rage and grief burned together inside me, an unquenchable, consuming fire. I wanted to scream at Dylan, to demand why he could do this to his own family, but I knew no answer would ever ease this pain. Matthew stepped out, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Jackson," he said, his voice softer now. "We'll bring him to justice. And you should prepare to identify your parents' bodies at the morgue." I nodded faintly, my heart empty, hollowed out. I didn't know how I'd ever face this unimaginable loss. My parents were gone, brutally taken. And Dylan, the brother I once knew, had been the one to take them from me. Dylan's trial took place just a few weeks later. I didn't attend. I couldn't face his face. I couldn't bear to hear his horrific confession again. Matthew updated me over the phone, his voice steady, but laced with genuine empathy. Dylan was sentenced to life in prison without parole, he said. He'll spend the rest of his days behind bars, paying for the monstrous crime he committed. But that sentence? It didn't bring my parents back. It didn't erase the painful memories Jaden carried. And it certainly didn't mend the gaping cracks in my heart. I arranged my parents' funeral on a quiet afternoon in Reno. The small church our family used to attend on weekends was filled to capacity. Neighbors, friends, even regular customers from the grocery store came to pay their respects, bringing white chrysanthemums and heartfelt condolences. Mrs. Carter, the elderly neighbor, held my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. Joseph and Marilyn were good people. Jackson, she said, her voice trembling. They didn't deserve this. I could only nod, unable to speak, terrified that if I opened my mouth, I'd simply break down. The funeral was somber. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the oak trees in the cemetery and the soft murmur of prayers. I stood before their graves, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. But I forced myself to be strong. For Jaden. After the funeral, I took Jaden to live with me. Before my parents' graves, I knelt, placing my hand on their cold headstones. I whispered, I promised to take care of Jaden like my own son. I won't let him suffer anymore. The wind blew, carrying a strange, gentle sense, as if my parents were listening, smiling from somewhere far away. I took Jaden's hand, leading him away from the cemetery. And in that moment, I knew. This was a promise I would keep. At all costs. The first days in Las Vegas weren't easy. Jaden was still haunted by everything that had happened. He'd wake up crying every single night, calling for his grandparents. I'd hold him close, singing the lullabies Mom used to sing to me, even though my voice would crack with my own tears. I'm here, Jaden, I'd whisper, I won't leave you alone. I spent every spare moment with him, playing, telling stories, trying to bring some light back to his eyes, still shadowed by such a profound darkness. Slowly, with immense patience and all the love I could muster, Jaden began to smile again. His smiles were faint at first, but to me, they were like the first rays of sunlight finally breaking through an endless storm. I decided to sell the grocery store and the house in Reno. Those places held too many painful memories. I couldn't keep them. Couldn't let those memories continue to trap us. The money from the sales wasn't much, but it was enough to start fresh, a new life for Jaden and me. I moved us into a larger apartment in Las Vegas, with a room just for him, where I hung his drawings and proudly placed his worn teddy bear on the bed. In the months that followed, as Jaden and I settled into our new rhythm, I began to truly reflect on my family. My parents had made mistakes, spoiling Dylan too much, letting him become selfish and broken. Their favoritism left deep, festering wounds, not just for me, but for them and Jaden too. But I also realized that despite our family's flaws and fractures, love and responsibility were the core foundation that had always held us together. I learned a brutally painful lesson. Blind indulgence and neglect can push a child down an incredibly destructive path, even to tragedy. But I also firmly believed that with genuine love and unwavering responsibility, I could save a life. Jaden's life. One evening, as the neon lights of Las Vegas lit up the sky, I held Jaden's hand, walking him down a bustling street. He pointed at the lights, giggling at a fountain that changed colors. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep, profound stillness in my heart. No more nightmares. No more echoes of Dylan's shouts. No more agonizing memories of Reno. Just me and Jaden, uncle and nephew, walking together under the bright, hopeful glow of this city. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jaden would still have nights when he woke crying, and I would forever carry the scars of what Dylan did. But I was determined. Determined to build a new family. One without violence, favoritism, or betrayal. A family built purely on love, where Jaden could grow up without fear. Where I could truly keep my promise to my parents and to myself. As we stopped by a fountain, Jaden looked up at me, his eyes sparkling. Uncle Jax, can I stay with you forever? He asked, his voice small, but full of pure, innocent hope. I knelt down, hugged him tight, and smiled, though tears welled in my eyes. Forever, Jaden, I said. You and me. We're family. Our story closed under the radiant lights of Las Vegas. But in my heart, there was only stillness and a fierce resolve. I would not let our family's tragedy repeat. I would give Jaden the life he deserved. And I would honor the true meaning of family, not through blind indulgence, but through unwavering love and profound responsibility. That was the legacy I wanted to leave. Not just for Jaden, but for my parents, who loved us, however imperfectly. What a journey, right? This story, it's been a heavy one. But I want to know what you think. Have you ever faced such a painful betrayal from someone you loved? Or seen a family ripped apart by something so unthinkable? Drop a comment below and let me know. I truly want to hear your thoughts. And if this story resonated with you, if it left you thinking, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more. Your support means the world, and it helps me keep sharing these powerful, raw, and deeply human stories. Until next time, take care.